As we leave the 1954 World Cup behind us, with Hungary's golden generation falling and the West German national team helping to rebuild a nation, 1958 gives us the rise of one of the greatest players and nations to ever play the game. Hey guys, welcome back to the World Cup review series where we explore every single World Cup in 20 minutes or less. Today we're hitting the year 1958. If 1954 was about the old world trying to rebuild, 1958 was the year football finally stepped into the modern era. We're now in Sweden. The vibes are immaculate. The weather is fantastic. And the sport is about to get its first global megastar. But before we talk about one of the legends of the games, let's get a look at the field. The 1954 Giants Hungary were basically a ghost of themselves because of the 1956 Hungarian Revolution. West Germany was back to defend its title, and for the first and only time in history, all four home nations, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, actually qualified. It was a massive moment for British football, even though it ended in heartbreak for most of them. The stage was also set for a new superpower to take over, and Brazil was arriving with a chip on its shoulder and a 17-year-old kid who was about to change the world. So Brazil wasn't just showing up with Samba style, they were the first team to get scientific. They brought a massive delegation with them to Sweden. A doctor, a dentist, because dental health apparently affects performance. Who knew? I'll tell you who. Hansi Flick. And even a psychoanalyst. The psychologist, Dr. João Carvalhais, actually gave the players personality tests. He famously told the manager, Vicente Fiola, that Pelé and the legendary winger Garrincha shouldn't play. He said Pelé was, quote, too infantile and lacked the fighting spirit, and that Garrincha was basically too simple-minded to understand complex tactics. Fiola's response is legendary. He basically said, you might be right, but you don't know football. The kid stays. Imagine if they listened to the quote-unquote expert. We'd be talking about a 1958 World Cup as the one Brazil lost because their best player was sitting in a psychologist's office. The group stage was a bloodbath. You had Group 4, the quote-unquote group of death, featuring Brazil, the Soviet Union, England, and Austria. England itself was in a tough spot. Just 5 months earlier, the Munich air disaster had wiped out the Busby Babes of Man United, one of the best teams in Europe at the time. England ended up losing three of their best national team players, including the great Duncan Edwards. England fought hard. They actually drew 0-0 with Brazil, the first scoreless draw in World Cup history, but they were eventually knocked out in a playoff by the USSR. Then you have Argentina. They arrived in Sweden thinking that they were the kings of South America because they had just won the Copa America. But they had one arrogant rule that led to their demise. If you played in Europe, you could not play for Argentina. They left their best players in Italy and arrived in Sweden completely out of shape. Reports say they spent more time partying and exploring the Swedish nightlife than training. The result? They got absolutely clobbered, 6-1 by Czechoslovakia. When they flew back to Buenos Aires, fans were waiting at the airport to throw garbage at them. Talk about a reality check. Now, the darkest story of the tournament, the Soviet Union had a striker named Eduard Streltsov. He was the quote-unquote Russian Pelé, powerhouse who was scoring goals for fun. However, the Soviet state hated his individualism. He had a flashy haircut, liked Western jazz, who doesn't, and became too popular. A few months before the tournament, he was accused of a crime against a woman under extremely fishy circumstances. Most historians now believe that he was set up by the KGB or a high-ranking politician whose daughter he refused to marry. Instead of leading the USSR in Sweden, Streltsov was actually sent to the Gulag for 12 years. 12. The Soviets effectively destroyed their own chances at a trophy because a player was quote-unquote too cool for the communist collective. USSR still ended up making it to the quarterfinals, but they were missing their superstar. Now, let's talk ball for a second. Let's talk the actual football for a second. 1958 was the birth of the 4-2-4 formation. Up until then, everybody played a WM system, which was very man-to-man and rigid. Essentially, you had two center backs, three guys above them, and then in your attack, you had three midfielders and two strikers. Brazil brought in an Argentinian assistant coach who helped them master this new system. For the first time in the history of the game, you had attacking fullbacks like Nilton Santos and Jamal Santos flying up the wings. This was the blueprint for a modern wingback. It confused the hell out of the European teams who were used to defenders just staying in their own box and not really attacking or going with the attack. Combined with Garincha, a guy whose legs were legitimately crooked, like they were crooked, uh, but he could dribble past an entire defense. Brazil wasn't just winning, they were putting on a show. Really the first showing ever of the Samba style from Brazil. They beat Wales 1-0 in the quarterfinals, Pelé's first goal, then destroyed France 5-2 in the semis with a Pelé hat trick. The final was set. Brazil versus Sweden. Sweden on its home turf. Sweden actually scored first in the game. The home crowd went wild, but Brazil did not panic. Pelé and Vavá took over. Pelé scored one of the most famous goals ever, flicking the ball over a defender's head and then volleying it into the net. Pure disrespect and class from the legend himself. Brazil ended up going on to win 5-2, and at the final whistle, Pelé, who at the time only 17 years old, he actually fainted on the pitch. When he woke up, he was crying. He was remembering back to 1950 when Pelé saw his dad cry for the first time when Brazil lost the final. He was on this day, he told his dad, "One day I'll win it for you." 8 years later, he's the one holding the trophy, fulfilling his promise to his dad. Pelé grew up eating bread and bananas for dinner, and now he was the king of football at just 17 years old. Brazil wasn't just a country anymore, it was a brand. 1958 was the last time we saw a pure era of football before any massive commercialization took over, but it gave us everything: tactical genius, political scandals, and the birth of a legend. Next time you see a 17-year-old making his debut, remember Pelé. Smash that like button, subscribe if you're new, and let me know in your comments who's your GOAT. Pelé, Messi, Ronaldo, Maradona. Catch you in 1962. Peace.